Hello, my cherished family. It's wonderful to have you back at Wisdom Post Stories, a place where our souls unite through powerful narratives. We begin with gratitude. Divine Creator, thank you for connecting us across oceans and mountains today. Protect, strengthen, and inspire each listener through stories filled with wisdom and compassion. Amen. Tell me, from which part of our beautiful planet are you watching? Did previous stories touch your heart? Your thoughts bring warmth and meaning to this gathering. It was around sunset when I arrived home, the warm golden light of the evening casting long shadows over the quiet streets of our village. As I entered the house, I noticed my mother and Aunt Nasiba sitting in the courtyard, their voices blending with the rustling of the leaves. They were deep in conversation, and when I entered, both of them looked up, their expressions shifting. Aunt Nasiba immediately made a subtle gesture to my mother, signaling her to be quiet, and then spoke in a tone that was both knowing and slightly disapproving. "Your daughter is growing up," Aunt Nasiba said, her gaze flicking to me. "She's 15 now. You need to keep a close eye on her. At this age, it's not good for her to be out with her friends until late. She's too young for that kind of freedom. You should be more cautious." I felt the weight of her words settle on me. 15 was the age when I felt like I was beginning to bloom, a time when the world seemed full of endless possibilities. Yet Aunt Nasiba's words felt like a cloud overshadowing my budding sense of independence. I didn't say anything in response, but her criticism stung more than I was willing to admit. Aunt Nasiba continued, oblivious to my discomfort, her voice tinged with a sternness that left no room for argument. "A girl needs to be watched like a hawk at this age," she said. "She might have all the beauty and potential in the world, but she still needs to be controlled. You may feed her the best food, but if you don't keep an eye on her like a lioness watching her cubs, she might slip away. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. If you don't keep her in check, you'll regret it." Her words were harsh and I could feel the heat rise in my face. I didn't like being talked about in such a manner. I was not a child anymore, not someone who needed to be constantly controlled. But there was no point in arguing with Aunt Nasiba, so I silently turned and walked away, heading straight to my room. My mother, perhaps sensing the tension in the air, called after me. "Make some tea for Aunt Nasiba before she leaves," she asked gently, as if trying to calm the situation. But I wasn't in the mood to listen. I was too angry at the judgment she had passed on me, and I couldn't bring myself to make tea for her, not after what she had said. I stayed in my room fuming until Aunt Nasiba finally left. When I came out, my mother gave me a concerned look. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the change in my mood. I wanted to tell her, but I wasn't sure how to explain the hurt I felt. She had always been kind, but Aunt Nasiba's words had made me feel like a prisoner in my own life. I didn't know how to express my frustration without sounding childish, so I simply avoided the subject. Earlier that day, I had spent time at my friend Pino's house, just a short walk from ours. Pino and I had been friends since we were little, sharing the same school, the same neighborhood, and the same sense of adventure. We had always spent hours together, talking about everything under the sun, from our schoolwork to our dreams for the future. Pino's family was like my second family, and we were incredibly close. My mother worked for the Chaudhry family, taking care of their household chores. My father had passed away when I was young, and my mother had raised me on her own ever since. She had always been the pillar of strength in my life, working tirelessly to provide for us. She had made sure I had everything I needed, including an education. I had just finished my matriculation exams, and now that they were over, I felt lost. There was no schoolwork to occupy my time, no real sense of purpose beyond the mundane chores at home. I spent most of my days visiting Pino or other friends to pass the time. My mother came home only in the evening, and I didn't like being alone in the house for long periods. The quiet seemed to magnify every feeling, making me more aware of how empty the space felt. The house seemed to swallow me up in its silence, and I often felt a sense of unease when I was alone. I would much rather be with my friends, where the air felt lighter, filled with laughter and conversation. Lately, my mother had been more tired than usual. She had trouble keeping up with the housework, and after working all day at the Chaudhry household, she would return home exhausted, her energy depleted. I could see the toll it was taking on her, and it made me feel helpless. I knew I had to step in and help her, but I wasn't sure how much I could do. The weight of the household responsibilities fell on her, and now it was starting to affect her health. One evening, my mother asked me to go and get some milk from Dinu Uncle's house. She had been feeling especially tired that day. "I don't have the strength to go there today. Can you go instead?" she asked, her voice tinged with fatigue. I hesitated, looking at the distance to Dinu Uncle's house. It wasn't far, but the thought of going alone made me uneasy. I had never been one to wander around the village on my own, especially at dusk. When I had visited Pino the day before, she had said, "My father doesn't let me go out anymore. He says I'm too old to wander around the village like I used to." That comment had left me feeling uneasy. I wasn't sure if I was ready to go out on my own, especially with all the rumors and gossip that seemed to swirl around the village. But my mother reassured me. "It's our village," she said with a calm smile. "Everyone knows everyone. You'll be fine. There's no need to be scared." Reluctantly, I agreed. With the milk container in hand, I set off for Dinu Uncle's barn, trying to push my worries aside. The streets were quiet, and the evening air was cooler than usual. The familiar faces of neighbors gave me a sense of comfort, but the thought of being alone with my thoughts made me uneasy. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that Dinu Uncle wasn't there. Instead, his son, Amjad, was standing in the barn, his back turned as he prepared the milk. Amjad had always been polite and friendly, but today there was something different about him. When he turned and saw me, his expression changed, and a small smile appeared on his face. "It's been a long time since I've seen you," he said, his voice warm. "You've grown up so much. I remember when you were just a little girl. I used to come by your house and you'd be running around with your mother. And now, here you are, all grown up." I smiled at the memory of those days. Amjad had always been around, a familiar face in our village, but today there was something in his words that made me feel self-conscious. I wasn't a child anymore, and I could see that Amjad had noticed the change in me too. As he poured the milk into my container, his hand brushed mine lightly. The touch was brief, but it sent a wave of warmth through my body, something I hadn't expected. I quickly withdrew my hand, unsure of what to do with the sudden fluttering in my chest. It was the first time I had ever felt something like this. I had always seen Amjad as a family friend, someone I had known my whole life. But today he was no longer just a friendly face. There was something else in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. The next day I found myself walking to Dinu Uncle's barn again, the milk container hanging from my hand as my thoughts raced. Since my interaction with Amjad the previous day, something had changed. The touch of his hand, brief but lingering, had stirred something inside me that I wasn't prepared for. Every time I thought about it, my heart would race a little faster. I didn't want to admit it, but there was no denying it. I felt differently around Amjad now. The way he had looked at me, the way he had spoken, made me realize that I wasn't just a little girl to him anymore. I had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep as I wondered whether it was just my imagination or if Amjad had truly seen me in a new light. But as the morning light filtered through my window, I had resolved to act as if nothing had changed. I couldn't let my feelings for him, whatever they were, get in the way of my daily life. I had to focus on helping my mother, taking care of the house, and maintaining the sense of normalcy that had kept us going for so long. When I arrived at the barn, I was surprised to find that Amjad was already there, standing by the milk buckets, his back to me, as he prepared the containers. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say or how to act around him now. But when he turned and saw me, his face broke into that warm smile I had come to know so well, and the tension in my chest eased just a little. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle and calm. "You're early today. I wasn't expecting you so soon." I smiled nervously, suddenly aware of how my heart seemed to skip a beat whenever he looked at me. "I thought I'd come early and get it over with," I replied, trying to sound casual. As Amjad poured the milk into my container, he spoke again, his voice soft and a little hesitant. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I know it's probably strange for me to say this, but I want you to know that I really like you." His words sent a rush of warmth through me, and for a moment I could hardly breathe. I had never expected him to say anything like that. He had always been kind and friendly, but now his words felt different. They carried a weight, a sincerity that I couldn't ignore. I stood there unsure of how to respond, my heart pounding in my chest. Amjad seemed to notice my hesitation and quickly added, "I've liked you for a long time, but I wasn't sure how to tell you. I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable." I didn't know what to say. The reality of his confession hit me like a wave, and I found myself struggling to gather my thoughts. I had never considered Amjad in this way before. He had always been a part of my life, but now the possibility of something more between us was both exciting and terrifying. "I don't know what to say," I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought about you like that before." Amjad's face softened, and he took a step closer to me, his gaze intense but gentle. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, "but I wanted you to know how I feel. If you don't feel the same, that's okay. But I couldn't keep this from you anymore." For a moment I stood there, caught in the whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt flattered by his confession, but on the other hand, I felt scared and uncertain. Was I ready for this? Did I even want this? Before I could respond, Amjad reached for the milk container again, pouring it into my jar with careful precision. "I'll make sure you always get the best milk," he said, his voice suddenly softer, as though he was trying to put me at ease. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I nodded, too stunned to say anything more. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had always admired Amjad, but the way he looked at me now, the way he spoke to me, was different. It made me feel both vulnerable and alive, and I didn't know how to handle it. As I left the barn with the milk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between us. But I didn't know what to do with these new feelings. I had never been in a situation like this before. I had never been in a position where someone had confessed their feelings for me, and I wasn't sure how to respond. Over the next few days, my interactions with Amjad grew more frequent. Each time I visited the barn, he would speak to me more openly, and I could see the way his eyes followed me, the way he seemed to be waiting for me to say something. I could feel his gaze on me, and each time our eyes met, there was a silent understanding between us. But despite the growing attraction, I couldn't ignore the warnings that had been instilled in me by my mother and others. There were so many things I didn't understand about this new dynamic. I had always been careful about my relationships, especially with boys. I didn't want to make any mistakes, especially not with someone as important as Amjad, who was now more than just a family friend. And yet, despite all my caution, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop wondering what it would be like to be with him, to explore these feelings that were blossoming inside me. But I also knew that I had to be careful. This was new territory, and I didn't know where it would lead. One afternoon, as I returned home with the milk, I found myself lost in thought. My mind kept drifting back to Amjad and the conversation we had had in the barn. I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, but I was afraid of what it meant. Was this just a fleeting feeling? Or was there something more to it? When I walked into the house, my mother was sitting by the window, her face drawn with worry. She looked up at me as I entered, and I could see the concern in her eyes. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "You've been gone for a while." I hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to answer. "I was just getting the milk," I said, trying to sound casual. My mother nodded, but there was something in her gaze that made me feel uneasy. She seemed to be noticing something in me that I hadn't quite understood myself. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked gently. "You seem different lately." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't know how to explain the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling, the confusion and the excitement all tangled together. I didn't know how to put into words what was happening inside me. "I'm fine," I finally said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the truth. I wasn't just tired. I was confused. I was scared, and I didn't know how to handle it. The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster. Every time I saw Amjad, my heart raced. I couldn't shake the memories of the conversations we had shared, the way his eyes looked at me, the warmth in his voice when he confessed his feelings. It was all so overwhelming, and yet something inside me wanted to keep going, to explore where this new connection might take us. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. I had always been taught to be cautious, to protect myself from people who might take advantage of my innocence. Was Amjad really the person he appeared to be? Or was I being swept away by the excitement of a new feeling? What if this was just a passing phase for him, and I would be left behind, heartbroken and alone? I tried to push these thoughts aside, but they kept coming back. Every time I went to the barn, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. Should I be letting him get so close to me? Should I let my guard down? Or should I listen to the voice inside me telling me to protect myself? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. And the more I spent time with Amjad, the more complicated things became. He would try to speak to me more, his words softer, more intimate, as if he were trying to draw me in. I couldn't deny the chemistry between us, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what kind of relationship this was supposed to be. One evening, as I walked to the barn, I noticed that Amjad was standing outside waiting for me. The moment our eyes met, a rush of emotion surged through me, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. His expression was serious, almost as if he had something important to say. "I've been thinking about us," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I know we've been spending a lot of time together, and I want you to know that I'm serious about what I said. I want to be with you. I want to take care of you, make you happy." His words sent a thrill through me, but at the same time, doubt clouded my mind. Was he really serious? Or was he just saying what I wanted to hear? "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I replied, my voice shaking a little. "This is all happening so fast. I've never felt like this before, and I'm not sure what to do about it." Amjad looked at me with a mixture of concern and understanding. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch mine. "You don't have to rush," he said softly. "We can take it slow, but I don't want to hide my feelings anymore. I want you to know that I care about you." I pulled my hand back, feeling a wave of uncertainty wash over me. "I care about you too, but I don't know if I'm ready for this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Amjad didn't say anything at first, his expression unreadable. But then, after a long pause, he nodded slowly, as if accepting my words. "I understand. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for, but I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relieved that he wasn't pressuring me, but guilty because I couldn't give him the assurance he wanted. I liked Amjad, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for the kind of relationship he seemed to want. I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything that would change my life so dramatically. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, my mind racing with thoughts of Amjad. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, trying to make sense of everything. Could I trust him? Was this love? Or was it just infatuation? I didn't have the answers, and the uncertainty was eating away at me. The next day, I decided to talk to Pino. I needed someone to confide in, someone who could help me make sense of everything. Pino had always been my closest friend, the one person I trusted more than anyone else. She knew me better than anyone, and I hoped she would understand what I was going through. When I arrived at her house, she could immediately tell that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "You look like you've been up all night." I sat down beside her, my hands trembling slightly as I spoke. "It's Amjad," I said quietly. "He told me he cares about me. He said he wants to be with me, but I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know what to do." Pino looked at me thoughtfully before responding. "You've known him for so long," she said slowly. "He's always been there, and it sounds like he really cares about you. But I get it. You're scared. This is a big step. But you don't have to make any decisions right now. Take your time. Just be honest with him about how you're feeling." Her words gave me some comfort, but they also made me realize something important. I'd been holding back because I was afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of getting hurt. But the truth was, I didn't know what would happen. None of us ever do. I had to trust my instincts and take things one step at a time. I went home that day feeling a little lighter, a little more at peace with my uncertainty. I knew I wasn't ready to rush into anything with Amjad, but I also knew that I couldn't keep pushing him away forever. Whatever happened, I would figure it out as I went along. As the days passed, the weight of my feelings for Amjad continued to cloud my thoughts. The way he looked at me, the way his words had seemed so sincere, I couldn't ignore the pull I felt. Yet deep inside, something warned me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I couldn't control. I was torn between the newness of these emotions and the fear that they might end in heartache. Amjad had continued to press forward, inching closer each day, but I had kept my distance, unsure if I was ready to step into a relationship that seemed to carry so many unknowns. The days turned into weeks, and though I had tried to bury my doubts, they were always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One afternoon, I couldn't ignore the gnawing discomfort anymore. I had to confront Amjad. I couldn't let this continue without knowing the truth. When I arrived at the barn that day, I found Amjad alone, his face serious and his expression unreadable. I could tell he was waiting for me, but his usual warmth was replaced by something darker. "I think it's time we talk," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know you've been avoiding me. I can tell you're not sure about this, about us, but I want you to know that I care about you more than anything. I don't want to lose you." His words felt heavy, but something in his tone, something about the way he was speaking made me uneasy. It wasn't the sincerity I had hoped for. It was as if he was demanding something from me, something I wasn't ready to give. My heart beat faster as I realized that this wasn't just about love. This was about control, manipulation, and deceit. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said quietly, the words finally escaping my lips after days of uncertainty. "You've been making me feel things I'm not ready for. I don't know if I can believe what you're saying." Amjad's eyes hardened, the softness disappearing completely. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just looked at me as if I had betrayed him. Then, in a voice tinged with anger, he spoke again. "You don't trust me? After everything I've done for you?" He spat, taking a step closer. "I've been nothing but good to you. And this is how you repay me? You're the one who's been leading me on, pretending like you don't care." His words hit me like a slap. The anger in his voice made my stomach churn. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. This wasn't the gentle, kind Amjad I had grown up with. No, this was someone else, someone darker, someone whose intentions were much more sinister than I had imagined. "I never asked for this," I said, backing away, my voice shaking. "You've been manipulating me, making me feel like I owe you something, but I don't." Amjad stepped forward again, this time with force, grabbing my arm tightly. "You don't get it, do you? You're the one who came to me. You led me to believe that we could be something, and now you're backing away like it's nothing. You don't get to play with my feelings and walk away, not after everything." His grip on my arm tightened, and I felt the weight of his words, the pressure building in my chest. I wanted to pull away, to scream, but my body wouldn't move. I was trapped, both physically and emotionally. "You've ruined me," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I trusted you, and you've ruined me." Amjad's face twisted with frustration, his anger bubbling over. "Ruined you?" he scoffed. "You've ruined yourself. You came to me. You let me in, and now you're playing the victim. You think anyone else will want you now, after what you've done?" His words were cruel, cutting deep into me. He was right. He had taken something from me. He had made me believe that I could trust him, and in return, I had given him everything. My trust, my innocence, my sense of self. And now he was turning it all against me, blaming me for something that was never my fault. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice breaking, "but I can't be part of this anymore." "You don't have a choice," Amjad said coldly, his grip on my arm still tight. "You're mine now. You can't just walk away." The terror I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I had been trapped in a situation I didn't understand, and now I was facing the consequences of my naivety. I had thought that love was supposed to be kind and gentle, but now I realized how easily it could turn into something toxic, something that could break you. "Please," I whispered, desperate. "Please let me go." Amjad's expression softened, but it was clear that his interest in me was no longer driven by love. It was driven by something darker, a desire for control. He let go of my arm and I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Go ahead," he said with a final, bitter laugh. "Walk away, but remember, no one will ever want you again. You're ruined." I turned and ran, the tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking with every step. I couldn't face anyone, not my mother, not anyone in the village. What would they think of me? What would my mother think? When I finally reached home, I was a wreck. I collapsed onto my bed, shaking, unable to stop the tears that flowed freely. I had let my guard down, and now I was paying the price. I had been naive, too trusting, and I had let someone take advantage of me in a way that I couldn't undo. My mother came to my room later that evening, concern written all over her face. She sat beside me on the bed, her hand on my forehead, feeling the heat of my feverish skin. "What's wrong, my child?" she asked softly, brushing my hair away from my face. "You've been so sick, and you won't tell me what's going on." I wanted to tell her everything, to spill the truth, to confess everything to her. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see the look of disappointment in her eyes. Instead, I just shook my head, too broken to speak. "I'm fine, Mama," I whispered, even though I knew I wasn't. I wasn't fine. I had ruined everything. And now I had no way to fix it. The days passed, and I stayed hidden in my room, my mind consumed by the events that had unfolded. I felt as if I had lost everything. My self-worth, my dignity, everything had been taken from me, and now I was left with nothing but the harsh reality of my choices. It wasn't until days later, when Dinu uncle came to speak with my mother, that the truth finally came to light. He had spoken to her about what had happened, and though I couldn't hear all the details, I could feel the weight of his words. My mother was crushed, devastated by what she had learned. She cried for hours, holding me close, but even her love couldn't undo what had been done. I had made a mistake, and now I had to live with the consequences. "Don't worry, my daughter," she whispered through her tears. "We will get through this. You are not alone." But even as she said those words, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. My past had been shattered, and I was left to rebuild a future from the broken pieces.